بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين وبعد. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ لَا تُفْسِدُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ قَالُوا إِنَّمَا نَحْنُ مُصْلِحُونَ. The oppressors in this world, those who carry out injustices, they will continue to do the wrong that they do because their hearts are turned upside down and they are blinded to their own wrongs. And if you ever confront them and say, how is it that you have such impunity, you have such carelessness that you can shed blood, you can cause injustice, you can murder people, you can take lives, you can raise homes? And what will their response be? إِنَّمَا نَحْنُ مُصْلِحُونَ. We're doing good. We're forces of goodness. We're trying to bring freedom to the world. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَلَا إِنَّهُمْ هُمُ الْمُفْسِدُونَ. Don't for a moment think that just because they have flowery words or that they'll have sophisticated explanations, that somehow they're innocent or they're good. You know, there's this concept called manufacturing consent. Based on media, newspaper, common ideas and understandings, people can make you think in a particular way even though you don't feel that way. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, إِذَا جَاءَكُمْ فَاسِقٌ بِنَبَإٍ فَتَبَيَّنُوا. Just because you're reading the news and it's telling you something, that, oh, Muslims are doing this or Muslims are doing that, or there's terrorism happening over here or terrorism happening over there, we should be smart enough and mindful enough that when sources that come to us that don't have credible backgrounds and they say all of these things, we don't just take it for granted. We have to do our research, we have to be mindful. And especially in a time of misinformation, where clearly for the past 1 year, all we're seeing is bloodshed and oppression and genocide, and people are able to turn a blind eye to that and make excuses for the rest of the oppression that they're doing. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us two very important principles. One in Surah Al-Baqarah and the other in Surah Al-Hujurat. In Surah Al-Baqarah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ لَا تُفْسِدُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ قَالُوا إِنَّمَا نَحْنُ مُصْلِحُونَ. When someone or a civilization or a group has a track record of constantly doing wrong, oppression, dhulm, murder, genocide, and you're going to go and ask for an explanation, you're barking up the wrong tree. The only explanation they're going to give is to justify the wrongs that they're doing, because why? أَلَا إِنَّهُمْ هُمُ الْمُفْسِدُونَ. They're blinded from their own wrongs. Their hearts are so turned that what they see could be the most despicable act for 99.9% of the world, but in their minds, they think what they're doing is justified. So, أَلَا إِنَّهُمْ هُمُ الْمُفْسِدُونَ. When somebody is doing wrong, don't expect an explanation from them. Rather, they will try to make it seem like not only are they innocent, they want to turn the tables and say, no, we're the madhloom, we're the victims, we're the ones who are being oppressed against. And the second thing, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِذَا جَاءَكُمْ فَاسِقٌ بِنَبَإٍ فَتَبَيَّنُوا. In a time of mass media, where for many of us, how do we get our news? You'll Google something and you'll look at the headlines. Okay, the NY Post says this, New York Times says that, CNN says this, and we're gathering all of our information, and we have this understanding of what's happening in the world. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَتَبَيَّنُوا, فَتَبَيَّنُوا. Be very careful, be very mindful. You may not even realize it, and you're already forming a thought that are not based on any facts. And then 1 year later, or a few months later, or even a few weeks later, people are retracting and say, oh, based on false information, we did this reporting. And then they're retracting, but nobody knows about the retraction. So there are some very powerful advices in these verses. MashaAllah, when the Imam was reciting this verse, it really, when Hafiz Sahib was reciting the verse, it really got into my head where he says, وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ لَا تُفْسِدُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ قَالُوا إِنَّمَا نَحْنُ مُصْلِحُونَ. That literally, for many years, but particularly the last year, this verse could not have been more relevant. Where right before our eyes, You can have the civilized countries, the more enlightened countries, the more advanced countries, the more educated countries based on these tropes. They can literally spin a lie of such evil and wrong and make it seem as though it's all about freedom and justice. But as Muslims, we understand that إِذَا جَاءَكُمْ فَاسِقٌ بِنَبَإٍ فَتَبَيَّنُوا. Whenever somebody says something to us, we're going to take a step back, observe the entire situation, and say, you know what, there's actually much more to reality than what you're saying. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to be mindful of misinformation and propaganda. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala never allow the oppressors to go away free. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala carry out justice either in this life or in the afterlife. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. Jazakumullah khair.